This video is by Straight Goods News, SGNews.ca.
It's from their annual reports.
Right.
They list it themselves.
Now that's all cash that you're saying. That
That's right.
On the books.
Yeah.
Now the finance minister himself has, or certainly, I believe the finance minister himself has said this, but certainly the Bank of Canada government has lectured the big corporations. They say they are hoarding cash when they could be creating jobs.
Right.
Is there any way that beyond increasing their taxes, you think the government can do to convince them to start loosening the strings and start spending to create jobs?
Yeah, it doesn't seem that declining corporate tax rates have encouraged corporations to spend more money on things like R&D, job creation, or investment in fixed capital. It appears at this point that likely a higher tax rate would be the answer in terms of recapturing some of that money that's been lost to cash hoarding.
So this is what government should do. That's your point.
Yeah, I mean, at this rate, Canada has, KPMG did a fairly advanced study on corporate tax rates, came out in 2012, looked at the top developed countries and found that Canada by a long shot had the lowest combined national and subnational tax rates. And so there's a fair amount of room to increase those tax rates, remain competitive with other countries, and regain more money to actually fund programs that are going to create jobs and increase fixed capital.
Even India or whatever, and it's just cheaper for them over there.
The tax rates are higher there. The other problem is that the vast majority of as you can see from the cash hoarders, are resource companies. You can't mine the tar sands in India, for instance. And so Canada already has basically the lowest tax rate in the lowest effective tax rate in the G7, one of the lowest effective tax rates in the industrialized world. And so we have some room to increase that tax rate. We have won the global race to the bottom. But what we've won is much higher cash hoarding for our corporations and much lower investments and higher deficits for our governments.
Why did you pick them and how?
So this year, they're the company on the SPTSX that's increased their cash holdings by the most compared to 2001. So they're sort of won the cash hoarding race, as it were. And this is endemic for the resource sector, that we actually have significant cash holdings within the resource sector. These companies are producing record profits, and those profits are not being reinvested at nearly the same level as we've seen, say, in 2000, for instance. And the corporate tax rates are much lower. So despite the fact these corporations are delivering much higher profits to their shareholders, the tax rate is much lower. And it appears that these companies just don't know what to do with the money. They're just piling it up in their bank accounts. And so that should be fairly concerning for policymakers, in a macroeconomic sense, that we've got unmet needs, high deficits and slow economic and job growth on the one side. And at the same time, we've got corporations that are hoarding this massive amount of cash. Hit a new peak second quarter of last year at about $570 billion. This is an unbelievable waste of resource to have it sitting in cash when it should be being used to create jobs, increase productivity for the country.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you were their salaries. Have you noticed that over the years that the more they hoard cash from these tax cuts, the bigger their salaries and bonuses for the CEOs are, or not?
Yeah, certainly CEO salaries compared to worker salaries, that spread has been increasing over time. So in the last year, the ratio was about 230 times or so, I believe. So the CEOs of the big companies in Canada make about 230 times what the average worker makes. So by the first couple days in January, they've already made your salary. And so that spread has been increasing over time. It was much smaller in the 90s. It was in the 100, 150 range in the 90s. And if you go back to, say, the 80s or the 70s, now you're in the 30 or 40 range. So CEOs made significantly less compared to their workers. And so, it's not so much that CEOs make more than other people. Obviously, they should make more, but the fact is that spread is growing. And what's interesting is as they're hoarding more cash, we're seeing at the same time this cash hoarding phenomenon, we're also seeing the phenomenon of CEO pay going through the roof. And so I think that in essence what we've seen through declining corporate income tax rates is a whole variety of very negative impacts rising CEO pay, stagnant worker pay, corporate cash hoarding. And so I think it's time to revisit this experiment that the Canadian governments, both at the federal and provincial level, have been running for about 15 years now.